that per year, or can that roll over, for example, in District C, if you only have 20 take it this year, can 61 take it the year after?
Yeah, no, this is going to be 1% of the district's enrollment. It's not going to be 1% plus 1% plus 1%. So in District C, if the first year there were 20 kids who decided to do this, and the next year, and their enrollment remained essentially the same, and then 21 kids said, hey, we'll take it, the next year they could do that. Now, there may be that kids leave, because sometimes kids go to private schools and say, oh, this isn't for me, and they leave. But there's going to be that restriction of 1% in any district. Does that answer your question?
And also, so 1%.
Total.
Total? Okay, so never more than like 41 kids at a time.
Right.
Okay.
So could you, just to follow up, so you could have, in a school, if you have a bunch of kids, like say in one grade, take scholarships, then the next couple of years, if they stay in the program, there wouldn't be any available.
Right.
For you. That's how it could play out.
Right. And it may be that the district's enrollment drops to 3,500, but you have 41 kids who have the scholarship and still are within the income guidelines. We're not going to take that away because the enrollment drops. It's kind of like the way they do liquor licenses, which you guys know what I'm talking about.
And does the 1% apply only to this scholarship program, or is it cumulative for all the voucher programs?
No, we're going to separate this out from the limitations that are in law regarding Ed Choice and the Cleveland Scholarship. You know, at the beginning, you know, my thought was, you know, we're punishing, or you would say this, we're making school districts and many great teachers and great schools sound bad because we're averaging all of these tests together when you've got a lot of great students in districts, and because we're averaging them, we're calling that a failing school. And I just think that's a poorly thought out, poorly way of describing it. But it's popular and people are kind of used to it. And so, as you all know, we sort of separated that out. So we're going to have a separate restriction. It's going to be not tied to the 60,000, which will come about in a couple of years on the other voucher programs.
Mark, is there a fairness concern in terms of from the parents and students' perspective? And then I can think of an example. Like if I lived in Bexley and I was a parent and I wanted to send my daughter to the school for girls, the Columbus School for Girls. I mean, I would get about $600, but if I moved a mile and a half in any direction, there's all school districts where they would get $4,500.
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's a fairness concern. And, you know, again, whatever restriction or the way, wherever we draw the line, someone is going to say, hey, wait a minute, I live on this side of the line, which is essentially what we have now with all of our school funding programs. Is it fair, for example, that in District B, we're spending nearly $20,000 per student, yet in District A, we're spending $8,400? Is that fair? Well, you know, it's pretty fair to the people in District B. Of course, many of them are paying the taxes, many of them are not. Is it fair that folks who are in the Ed Choice program, and by the way, where I live, my kids would be eligible for an Ed Choice scholarship. And so would a couple of the other people who live in my neighborhood who can afford to send their kids to private school because there is no income requirement on Ed Choice. Is that fair? Doesn't seem like it's fair to the person who lives outside the Ed Choice district who's making $30,000 a year to say, well, why does the fellow who has plenty of money and is able to afford this, why is he able to get a scholarship? Yet I make a lot less money because I live on the other side of the line. And that's why I think ultimately these scholarship programs must be based on need, not based on geography. But the district system is the system that we have. I will tell you this isn't straight across the board, and as soon as I say this, someone will start finding the exceptions to this. But in many cases, not as a rule, but you could look and see that the districts that are spending or get relatively low per pupil aid are also the districts that, at least in the testing, and I just talked about I don't know that testing is really the best way to judge schools overall. that amount coincides with schools that are testing higher. And so that isn't true exactly, because we've got a lot of rural schools, for example, that have a very low local tax base. They get a lot of money from the state, yet they test very, very well. So there's going to be some inconsistencies, certainly, with how this works.
So just to be clear, if your proposal passes, it supplants the current Ed Choice, or
No.
does it operate side by side with Ed Choice?
Yeah, to be clear, this will not affect Ed Choice. It will not affect the Cleveland Voucher Program. Ultimately what this should be is an additional school choice program. Open enrollment, charter schools, homeschool, joint vocational schools, Ed Choice, Cleveland Voucher, post-secondary enrollment option, autism scholarships, John Peterson, all of those things. This would be another listing on the menu, if you will.
So
and of course your local school district.
So we still have people who would be getting the scholarships, not because they have low income, but because their kids are in a district, a public school district that is, quote, failing.
That's correct.
We also have the side by side, we have the income eligibility.
Right, right. And it may be that in a district where a lot of kids are taking advantage of that Ed Choice scholarship, that they are not going to need to worry about, this won't affect the PAC. The PAC scholarship won't affect them, especially with the lifting of the limits on the Ed Choice. They're saying, well, I don't have to worry about what my income is. I can make whatever I want. But there are going to be folks in other districts that aren't labeled failing, and where do they stand? Well, if they're within the income limits, then they would be able to do that.
So could you give us an estimate, just a ballpark estimate, tell us how many people are currently getting scholarships under Ed Choice, and then how many more students do you think will be added to that from your program if it were passed?
Well, I think we're about 16 or 17,000 on Ed Choice. Cleveland program, I don't know, but I'm not sure how many are in the Cleveland program. Maybe some other wiser person can tell us. I don't know the answer on the PAC scholarship. I don't think, theoretically there are 1.7 million kids in the state of Ohio. 1% of that is 17,000, except that many of the kids in these districts aren't going to leave because the scholarship would not be enough. Many of the kids in these districts, in some of the urban districts, already have an Ed Choice scholarship, and they're taking advantage of that, so that wouldn't affect them. The question is, what about everybody else who doesn't have that opportunity? And I don't want to make a guess statewide. In some districts, it may be every kid who's eligible. In other districts, it's, well, we've already got Ed Choice. Why do we want to worry about that? And we don't want to worry if our income gets too high. We may lose the scholarship.
Fair to say, though, you said 17,000. 1% would be 17,000.
I think there's about 1.7 million kids in public schools in the state of Ohio.
And then,
So in theory, but again, you can probably take out the top, in terms of wealth, 20% of the school districts in the state of Ohio, which, by the way, are the same ones who don't allow open enrollment into their schools. Those school districts, probably most people aren't going to participate. Many other districts aren't going to participate because they have Cleveland and other districts already have other scholarship programs. And of course, a lot of kids, private school just isn't an option for them. They're not interested in that. But they may have 4 or 5 or 6 good public schools districts that they can choose from, where they can leave their home district and go out to those other districts.
So fair to say several thousand additional, but nowhere near a doubling of the Ed Choice. You said Ed Choice was about 16 or 17,000. You said this theoretically 17,000, but there's all sorts of reasons why it's not an extra 17,000.
Yeah, I guess I would, if I had to say in the first year, there might be a couple thousand. But that's really speculation on my part. And
does the program include any restrictions to prevent somebody who has already made this choice from coming back into the school district just to take advantage of the money?
You're talking about current private school
Yeah,
students?
somebody who comes back in the district just long enough to qualify and go back into a private school. We've seen that before with the
Yeah. Well, first of all, and I had someone mention this to me the other day, that someone, if you're in a private school, you've already made the choice. I don't think that's accurate, because many parents are making that choice every year, whether they can afford to do that. There are 60,000 fewer kids in private schools than there were, I think it's 8 years ago. I think it's at the number that someone gave me. And those kids, they didn't all graduate, they went someplace. And parents are making that decision at different times during the child's education. Some parents say, hey, I'm going to have my child go up to 4th grade, but when they start middle school, when all the kids at maybe the local public school are all going to middle school, that's when we're going to change. A lot of folks say, hey, I can afford K through 8, but I can't afford the high school. I'm going to go here kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, but we know we're not going to go to high school, so we're going to leave them. So that's not, I think that's a false premise to say that people have already decided that they're going to do this. And I was concerned. I know there are a lot of people who have really gamed the system by leaving for 6 weeks and coming back and things like that. In one sense, it concerns me that that's happening, because especially in situations where those folks have the income and are paying. And again, Ed Choice is not income-based. On the other hand, that's what happens when you have the market. And there are customers out there who are saying, I'm interested in what's the best opportunity for my child, and that's what's going to happen often, unless you have what I think are the appropriate restrictions, appropriate guidelines.